The first thing I heard was a woman screaming. The second thing was a police officer pounding on my front door. When I opened it, the cold shock hit me all at once. 2 police cruisers flooding my yard with red and blue light, neighbors gathering on their porches, and Karen standing in the middle of my driveway, shaking a stack of papers above her head like she was leading a crusade. "He's refusing to vacate my house," she shouted at the officers. "I'm the new owner. Arrest him." For a moment, I honestly thought I had stepped into someone else's nightmare, because behind me was my living room, my photos on the walls, my dog still barking upstairs, and in my hand, the original deed with my name printed in bold, black ink. All of this chaos, this surreal, choking tension started from one single moment, the day I refused to hand Karen a copy of my house keys. You want to know how things escalated from no to 911? Trust me, you're not ready for how deep this goes. Before we start, drop your location and local time in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story like this. If someone had told me a year earlier that my peaceful suburban life would turn into a full-blown legal nightmare complete with police lights, forged documents, and an HOA president who thought she was the crown princess of property law, I would have laughed in their face. But everything that led to that chaotic evening in my driveway, with cops questioning me and Karen screaming that I was illegally occupying her home, started months earlier. And if you want to understand how one simple no turned into sirens and accusations, you need to go back to the day I moved into Maple Ridge Estates. I bought this house when I was 40, a comfortable, modest but beautiful home at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, white fence, neatly lined shrubs, a garage big enough to finally build the little workshop I dreamed about. I work in IT security, the kind of job that pays well but also leaves you craving tranquility, structure, and a life without unnecessary drama. Maple Ridge Estates looked like the ideal fit. Clean streets, friendly neighbors, a big wooden sign at the entrance carved with the words, "A peaceful place to live." What the sign didn't say was, "Peaceful as long as you don't cross the HOA." I met Karen for the first time at a community meeting. She swept into the clubhouse wearing a neon pink blazer bright enough to qualify as a traffic hazard. Clipboard in hand, tight smile, a tone that sounded less like president of a community HOA and more like federal agent investigating tax fraud. Every sentence she spoke had 2 things in common. She said regulation at least once. She spoke like she expected someone to bow. I knew immediately what kind of person she was. The kind who thinks HOA authority is divine law. The first few months were uneventful. I didn't cause trouble, didn't ask for favors, didn't want to be noticed. But Karen's radar for non-compliant homeowners must have locked on to me the moment I moved in. Her first email arrived 3 months later. "Your trash bin was visible for 8 minutes after pickup. Please adhere to community standards." 8 minutes. I hadn't even finished sweeping the garage floor. I politely replied, "Thanks for the reminder," then ignored it. But that was only the appetizer. A few weeks later, "The grass near your mailbox is approximately 2 inches above the allowed limit." I measured it. It was 1.6 inches. Then, "There is an unapproved tool rack visible from the street when your garage is open." Yes, because the rack was inside my garage, where tool racks live. I still didn't argue. I'm not a confrontational person. But I did start saving every email. PDFs, printouts, everything. As someone who works in cybersecurity, documenting everything is second nature and a habit that would save me later. The real trouble began when Karen introduced her newest scheme, the Emergency Access Key Program. The idea sounded innocent enough. Every homeowner must provide the HOA with a copy of their house keys for emergency situations. Karen worded her email like she was proposing a heroic community safety initiative. You never know when a neighbor could need urgent help. By participating, you show your commitment to our community. Then the thinly veiled threat. Non-compliance may affect your standing within the neighborhood. I've worked too long in security not to spot a disaster. Giving a group of untrained volunteers unrestricted access to my house was reckless, irresponsible, and flat-out insane. Not to mention, completely illegal according to our governing documents. I reread the CC&Rs cover to cover. Not a single line granting the HOA access to private homes. No clause about mandatory keys. No rule allowing enforcement penalties for refusal. Nothing because the idea was absurd. So I replied clearly, I will not be providing any keys. HOA does not have legal authority to demand access to private residences. Karen responded in exactly 18 minutes. I know because I checked the timestamp. It is disappointing to see a homeowner refusing to support community initiatives. The board will review your refusal. Review my refusal sounded suspiciously like, we're going to find a way to punish you. From that day on, Karen marked me as an enemy. The next HOA newsletter included a passive-aggressive section titled, Certain Residents Are Jeopardizing Community Safety. Everyone knew exactly who certain residents meant. Neighbors began giving me strange looks. Some approached me casually on evening walks. Why won't you give them your keys? What are you hiding? I just smiled and said, privacy isn't a crime. But inside, I knew something was off. Nobody gets this fixated over a set of keys, unless they want something much, much bigger. One afternoon, Karen showed up at my front door with 2 board members. No appointment, no courtesy. Just 3 self-important HOA warriors blocking my porch like they were serving a warrant. She planted her heels on my welcome mat. We need your house keys. Now. I stood in the doorway, refusing to step aside. No. And that's final. Karen's face tightened like someone had pulled the strings too fast. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Compliance is mandatory. Not according to the governing documents, I said calmly. You would have thought I slapped her. The board members behind her stiffened, confused. Karen stepped close enough for me to smell her peppermint breath and rage. You don't want to lose your privileges in this community. Privileges? I glanced at my own lawn, my walkway, my home. I didn't need privileges. I had rights. Karen stormed off, but not before throwing a sentence over her shoulder that made my stomach sink. People who don't cooperate often find this neighborhood unsuitable for them. A threat, plain as day. That night I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by every HOA document I'd received since moving in. I compared each update Karen sent with the original CC and Rs from my purchase file, and that's when I noticed it. A small detail most people would never catch. The updated rule about mandatory keys had different formatting than the original CC and Rs. Different spacing, different punctuation, different sentence structure, and worst of all, a notary stamp dated 2 years after that notary had retired. Karen hadn't found a loophole. She'd invented one. Right there, under my yellow desk lamp, I realized exactly what kind of person I was dealing with. Not just a controlling HOA president, not just a bully with a clipboard, but someone who believed that if she printed something on HOA letterhead and forged a signature, it magically became law. And people like that don't stop at rules. They go after property. They go after control. Karen didn't want my keys. She wanted authority over my home. And refusing her wasn't just disobedience, it was a declaration of war in her mind. I could feel it. She wasn't done. In fact, she was just getting warmed up. And the next step she took, it would push her straight into criminal territory. Things escalated faster than even I could have imagined. Once Karen realized I wasn't going to fold, she didn't just push harder, she launched a full-blown campaign to paint me as some kind of neighborhood menace. And she wasn't subtle about it either. It started with the next community newsletter. Usually the newsletters were boring. Landscaping reminders, pool hours, a recipe from some overly enthusiastic neighbor. But this time, Karen added a new section titled Community Safety Concerns. And right in the middle of that section, with bullet points and bold text, was this little gem. Some homeowners are actively refusing to cooperate with emergency preparedness guidelines, putting the entire community at risk. No names, but everyone knew. Everyone. The morning that newsletter hit inboxes, I walked outside to get the mail and felt the shift instantly. Mrs. Patterson, who had always waved enthusiastically, suddenly pretended her dog was extremely interesting and tugged it away from me. A dad walking his kid to the bus stop gave me a stiff half-nod. Even the retired guy across the street stared at me like I was storing explosives in my basement. Karen's smear campaign was working, but it wasn't just gossip, it was strategic. She was softening the community, preparing them to accept whatever punishment she planned to roll out next. And oh, she did have plans. A week later, I received an official-looking envelope taped to my door. Not in the mailbox, taped, like a notice to quit. It read, "Non-compliance fee. Due to your refusal to adhere to the Emergency Access Key program, fines will begin accumulating weekly until compliance is achieved. The amount, $150 per week. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, nothing about Karen's obsession was funny anymore, but because the arrogance was unbelievable. An HOA cannot legally create a fine out of thin air. Fines must be in the governing documents. They must be voted on. They must be recorded properly. Karen did none of that. I wrote back, "These fines are invalid. The requirement itself is invalid. Any attempt to enforce them will be considered harassment." Karen responded within 30 minutes, "Your refusal is noted. The board will proceed accordingly." Now, let me pause here and explain something about Karen. She wasn't just controlling. She was the kind of person who believed silence equaled guilt and confidence equaled authority. The more calmly I rejected her demands, the more it enraged her. Over the next few weeks, I noticed strange new behaviors. Cars slowed down in front of my house more often. People took pictures of my property. Sometimes I'd catch someone walking by, pausing to stare at my windows as if checking something. One afternoon, I found a business card from a real estate agent tucked under my welcome mat. "Thinking of selling? Call me." I wasn't thinking of selling. But apparently someone else might have been thinking about it for me. That was when the dread first settled in my stomach. Karen wasn't just mad at me. She wasn't just trying to bully me. She was building a Casey-manufactured, malicious narrative that I was unsafe, irresponsible, uncooperative. Something she could use to justify whatever she wanted. And then she came back. Same spot on my porch. Same neon blazer. Same two board members dragged along like backup dancers in her one-woman power show. This time she didn't even knock. I opened the door, and she immediately stepped forward like she owned the air between us. "We're here to give you one last opportunity to provide your keys voluntarily," she said, tone dripping with the smugness of someone who thought she'd already won. I crossed my arms. No. Her jaw clenched. "Failure to comply will escalate this matter further. Karen," I said slowly, "you don't have the authority to demand access to my home, much less penalize me for refusing." "You don't get to decide what authority the HOA has," she snapped. I raised a brow. "Actually, the governing documents do. That did it." Her face twisted, her eyes narrowed, and suddenly she wasn't even hiding the threat anymore. "You're making this neighborhood very difficult," she said. "And residents who undermine community unity often find themselves facing consequences they didn't expect." The board members behind her shifted uncomfortably. Even they weren't fully on board with this villain monologue. "Is that a threat?" I asked. "Take it however you want," she said, spinning around with an overly dramatic flick of her hair. And that was the moment right there when something clicked inside me. Karen wasn't just planning to punish me. She was planning to take something from me. I went inside, locked my door, sat down at the kitchen table, and spread out every document in front of me. Emails, newsletters, fine notices, rules, amendments, meeting summaries. And the more I compared them, the more the inconsistencies screamed. Different fonts, different line spacing, signatures copied and pasted, notary stamps that didn't match state records. The amended rule about keys was not just unauthorized, it was forged. Karen had fabricated the entire basis for her demand. She wasn't acting out of duty, she was acting out of delusion and power hunger. And once someone in power starts forging documents to make their will legal, there's no telling how far they'll go. I documented everything. Screenshots, photos, printouts, a full digital folder with timestamps. But Karen wasn't done, not even close. 2 weeks later, I caught a man I didn't recognize standing on my lawn, taking photos of my house with a clipboard in hand. He wore a polo shirt with the HOA logo, but he wasn't one of the usual volunteers. I stepped outside. "Can I help you?" I asked. He startled like a guilty puppy. I'm just doing a compliance check." "For what?" he stuttered. General things." Behind him, a white SUV with no plates idled at the curb. I wrote down the last 4 digits of the VIN reflected on the windshield. When he noticed, he bolted into the SUV and drove away. That night I reviewed the security footage. He took photos of my windows, my door locks, even the side gate. Karen was escalating from harassment to reconnaissance. I emailed the HOA demanding an explanation. Karen replied with one sentence. "Community inspections are authorized under the safety clause." There was no safety clause. That's when I realized. Karen wasn't improvising, she was executing a plan. A slow, deliberate strategy. Paint me as unsafe. claim I'm non-compliant, fake amendments to justify action, document violations, push for forced access or even removal. Karen wasn't just trying to make my life difficult. She was positioning herself to take my home. Most people would have panicked. But panic isn't in my nature. What I did feel was anger, cold, controlled anger, the kind that sharpens focus instead of clouding it. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I wasn't going to crumble. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let someone like Karen think she could bully me into submission. So I did what I do best. I analyzed. I prepared. I documented every shred of misconduct. Karen thought she was the only one building a case. She had no idea I was building a bigger one. And soon enough, she would make her biggest mistake yet, the one that would drag the police into this mess and unravel her entire scheme. She just didn't know it yet, but I knew. Something very bad was coming. And Karen had already committed too far to back out now. I didn't even have to wait long before Karen made her next move. It arrived in the form of an email with the subject line, "You are gent, amended community rules." My immediate thought was, oh, here we go. I opened the PDF attachment, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the absurdity of the content but the formatting, sloppy margins, inconsistent spacing, and a header that looked like it had been pasted together in Microsoft Paint by a bored teenager. The document announced a brand new HOA rule. All homeowners are required to comply with the Emergency Access Key program. Refusal will result in fines, liens, and potential foreclosure proceedings under HOA authority. Foreclosure. Karen had jumped from, "You should give us your keys because community safety," to, "We will take your house if you don't." She wasn't even pretending anymore. I scrolled through the document slowly, reading every line twice. My cybersecurity background made it impossible not to notice the red flags. The layout was different from the legitimate CC&Rs. The terminology sounded like it had been ripped from a bad legal drama. And the notary signature? It was identical to one from an earlier document, pixel for pixel identical. Someone hadn't just forged a signature, they had copied and pasted it like a sticker. I printed the document, laid it on my kitchen table next to the original CC&Rs from when I bought the house, and used a yellow highlighter to mark every discrepancy. By the time I was done, it looked like a crime scene diagram. I sent the new rule to a friend of mine, an attorney specializing in real estate. Within an hour, he replied, "This is interesting. And by interesting, I mean illegal as hell. Keep everything. Do not throw anything away." His email ended with, "Whatever she's building toward, it's serious," as if I didn't already know. Meanwhile, Karen was busy preparing her own narrative. She held an HOA emergency meeting, which was suspicious because no meeting notice was sent, no agenda was posted, no quorum was formed, no residents knew it was happening. And yet, in the following week's Community Digest, she wrote, "The board unanimously approved the Emergency Access Key Program update. Homeowners must comply or face enforcement measures." Unanimously? She had 3 board members, of whom I had seen nervously shifting around her like scared interns. The 3rd board member, Mrs. Grant, hadn't been seen at HOA events in months because she'd been recovering from surgery. Something told me Karen wasn't counting votes. She was inventing them. But the more she pushed, the more determined she became to present her fantasy as fact. That's the thing about people like Karen. They don't recognize lines, they only recognize obstacles to climb over. I noticed the next shift when I began seeing unfamiliar faces near my property, not just bystanders or curious neighbors, but people clearly documenting things. A man in a bright vest walked by slowly, stopping to photograph my fence. A woman pretended to jog but filmed my driveway with her phone. One morning, a teenager stood across the street sketching something in a notebook. None of them approached me. None asked questions. They just lingered long enough to make notes and leave. Karen was building a file, and I knew exactly what kind of file it was. The kind you use to convince a judge or a police officer that someone is dangerous, unstable, or negligent. She was setting the stage for something bigger. I doubled down on my documentation. I set up additional cameras around the property, adjusted angles, took time-stamped photos of the house daily, and created 3 separate backups of all my evidence on a portable SSD, one in cloud storage, and one printed and stored in a locked metal box. If Karen wanted a war, I was going to fight it with facts and timestamps. 2 weeks passed quietly, too quietly. Then came the day Karen decided to escalate everything all at once. It was a Saturday morning. I stepped outside to water the plants and saw a white envelope stuck in my doorframe. I opened it casually, but the contents sucked the air right out of my lungs. It was a final notice of HOA enforcement action stating I owed $2,700 in accumulated non-compliance fines. If I didn't pay within 14 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. Failure to pay the lien could result in non-judicial foreclosure. At the bottom was a signature that was supposed to be mine, except it wasn't. It was a shaky, uneven scribble, clearly someone tracing or guessing what my signature looked like. Karen had forged my name. My hands shook with a mix of anger and disbelief. A forged signature wasn't just HOA nonsense, it was a crime. A serious one. And she had stapled it to a document threatening to take my house. She had crossed the line. I called my attorney immediately. He listened, didn't say a word, then let out a slow exhale. Yeah, that's fraud. This isn't an HOA squabble anymore. This is prosecutable. We scheduled a meeting with a county investigator the next week, but Karen wasn't about to wait that long. The next day, I received another alert, this time from the county recorder's office. Someone had attempted to file a lien on my property. Someone. I didn't need a detective to guess who. I drove straight to the county office, where the clerk recognized my address before I even finished my sentence. "Oh, that file," she said, giving me a heavy look. "We flagged it because there's something off." She pulled out the documents and placed them on the counter, and there it was. A lien request, signed by Karen, co-signed by the homeowner with another fake version of my signature, with a notary stamp that didn't match the registered notary for the date. It wasn't just sloppy. It was amateur hour criminal behavior. "I never signed this," I said firmly. "I didn't think so," the clerk said. "We've sent it for investigation already." That evening, as I stood on my porch, replaying everything in my head, something in the air shifted, the kind of shift you feel before a storm. The kind that tightens your chest and makes you brace your shoulders. Karen was running out of time, out of lies, out of ways to hide what she had done. People like her don't back down, they double down. And the next morning proved me right. I was sipping my coffee, watching the security cam feed on my phone, when I saw her, Karen, marching straight down the street. Pink blazer blazing like a warning flare. 2 board members trailing behind her, and in her hand a clipboard thick with papers. They stopped at the edge of my driveway. Karen looked at my house the way a vulture studies a wounded animal. Then she raised her clipboard and pointed it at my front door. She didn't knock this time. She didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. She dialed 911. I watched her speak animatedly, pacing, gesturing, pointing at my house like she was reporting a hostage situation. Her voice carried across the yard, even though I couldn't hear the exact words. But I didn't need audio. I knew exactly what she was saying. The lie she'd been building, constructing carefully brick by fraudulent brick, was finally ready for her big performance. Karen wasn't going to threaten me anymore. She was going to try to have me removed. She was going to claim she was the new owner. And it was only a matter of minutes before the police cars rolled up, lights flashing, and the officer knocked on my door with that hesitant, uncomfortable expression of someone walking into a mess he didn't understand. Karen had finally set her trap, but she had no idea I'd already dug one for her. Bigger, deeper, and filled with every piece of evidence she'd ever forged. When the police finally showed up, it was almost cinematic. 2 cruisers rolling down the street with their lights strobing across every house, every lawn, every pair of curtains suddenly cracking open so neighbors could watch the show. Karen must have felt like the star of the episode she had scripted for months. I stood in my foyer, watching the scene unfold through the front window. The officers stepped out, exchanged a few words with her, then looked toward my house with that "God, I hope this isn't as stupid as it sounds" expression. I couldn't blame them. Karen was waving her clipboard like a cheerleader with a weapon, pointing toward my home with jerky, exaggerated motions. Even from a distance, I could tell she was hyped, up cheeks flushed, hair frizzing from stress, voice sharp enough to pierce bulletproof glass. I opened the door before they had a chance to knock. The older officer, the one with graying hair and the posture of someone who'd seen too many HOA disputes, gave me a careful nod. "Sir, are you the resident here?" I nodded. "I am the owner of this house." Behind him, Karen shrieked, "No, he is not. He's refusing to vacate my property." I filed the foreclosure, I have the documents, he's illegally occupying my home. The younger officer's eyes darted between us like he was watching a ping-pong match. I sighed slowly. You might want to see the deed. Karen stomped forward. No, show them the real documents. The HOA has already taken legal possession. He's trespassing. He is a dangerous, uncooperative individual. Dangerous? I nearly laughed. I'm a middle-aged IT guy who drinks chamomile tea to calm down after stressful meetings. The most dangerous thing about me is my cholesterol, but Karen wasn't letting go of her delusion. She shoved a stack of paperwork toward the officers. It was the same junk she'd been mailing me for weeks: fake amendments, the fraudulent liens, and a printout claiming I had signed a payment plan with a signature that looked like a drunk toddler wrote it with their foot. The officers took the papers politely but exchanged a glance. Even they could tell something was off. Ma'am, the older officer said carefully, just because the HOA filed something doesn't mean… She cut him off, voice cracking with fury. It's not something. It's legal. He refused to provide keys. He refused to comply. That's grounds for seizure. The younger officer blinked. Ma'am, refusing to give the HOA a house key is not grounds for anything. Karen whipped around and glared at him as if he were the problem. I took a step back and gestured toward the inside of my home. Officers, would you like to come in? I think it'll be easier if you see the real documents. They looked at each other, nodded, and followed me inside. Karen tried to barge in behind them, but the older officer held out a hand. Ma'am, stay outside for now. She gasped like he had slapped her. But I'm the owner. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. His raised eyebrow said enough. Inside, I led them to the dining table, where I already had everything laid out: the real deed, property tax statements, mortgage statements, closing documents, even the original CC&Rs from when I purchased the house. The whole timeline, from legitimate documents to Karen's fabricated nonsense, was organized in neat stacks. The older officer examined the deed, then looked up at me. This appears to be legitimate. It is legitimate, I said, and every single document Karen gave you is fraudulent, including the forged signature that's supposed to be mine. I handed him the fake payment plan with my signature. He stared. That doesn't match. No, I said simply, because I didn't sign it. I then opened my laptop and showed them a timeline of every email Karen sent, screenshots of her amended rules and newsletters, security footage of her repeatedly approaching my house, photos of strangers she'd sent to document my property, side-by-side comparisons of real versus fake documents, and, most importantly, the county alert showing Karen's attempted fraudulent lien filing. By the time I finished, both officers were quiet. Not suspicious quiet, more like, oh hell, we walked into a felony quiet. Sir, the younger officer said slowly, you said you've reported this to the county already? Yes, and they flagged the lien as fraudulent. There's an investigator assigned to it. The older officer sat back, exhaled, and rubbed his forehead. This is a civil and criminal mess. Karen, meanwhile, was still outside, shouting, pacing, and throwing her arms around. Through the window, we could hear her yelling, "He's lying! He's dangerous! He threatened me!" Ah, yes, the classic Karen maneuver. When caught, escalate the victim card. I clicked the screen again. You'll want to see this. The footage played. The confrontation weeks earlier on my doorstep. Her yelling, her demands, her threats. My calm responses. No threats. No aggression. Nothing remotely dangerous. The younger officer whispered, "Oh, just one word," but it carried the weight of the entire situation. The older officer closed the fake documents Karen gave him, set them aside like they were contaminated, and stood up. Sir, we appreciate your cooperation. Please stay inside for a moment while we speak with her. I watched through the window as they approached Karen. Her face brightened when she saw them. She thought she had won, thought her performance had convinced them, thought she was moments away from watching me being dragged from my own house. But then the older officer spoke. Whatever he said, her smile slowly dissolved. Her shoulders stiffened. Her body language changed from triumphant to panicked. She started waving her arms again, trying to thrust her paperwork at them, but this time the officers didn't take it. The younger officer kept his hands up in a calming gesture, but his expression wasn't sympathetic anymore. It was cautious, professional, distance measured. Karen's voice rose again. No, you don't understand. I have authority here. I have full legal control. The older officer told her something short and sharp. Her jaw dropped. She sputtered. Lies. All lies. Then he reached for his radio. Karen froze. It was the first time I had ever seen her stop moving. Stop yelling. Stop raging. Just freeze. The older officer asked her to step aside. She refused. He asked again. She still refused. Then he stepped forward. Karen backed up like someone had pushed her. She wasn't in control anymore. Her fantasy wasn't working. Her forged paperwork wasn't convincing anyone. Her authority didn't matter. Reality had finally entered the conversation. The officers talked to her for what felt like 15 minutes. She shouted. She denied. She tried to twist the story, but the officers didn't budge. They weren't buying any of it. Eventually her shouts turned into whines. The whines turned into mutters. And the mutters turned into defeated silence. The officers left her standing in my driveway, deflated, trembling, clutching her clipboard like a shield that no longer worked. They came back to my door one last time. Sir, we're going to file a report, the older officer said. Based on what we saw and the documents provided, this appears to be a case of attempted fraud. A detective will follow up with you. The younger officer added, for your safety, keep everything documented. And keep your doors locked. I couldn't help but smirk. Trust me, officer. I always do. When they left, Karen stayed frozen in my driveway for several more minutes. I watched her through the window. She wasn't angry now. She wasn't yelling. She was scared. For the first time since this madness began, she realized the truth. She wasn't the hunter. She was the one about to be hunted by the law. And I, the quiet, polite homeowner she thought she could intimidate, was the one who had just sunk her entire scheme. For a few days after the police visit, things went strangely quiet, not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet you get right before a blown fuse sparks and sets the entire wall on fire. Karen disappeared. Not literally, she still lived a few streets over, but she vanished from her usual habitats. No strolling around with her clipboard, no passive-aggressive patrols, no neighborhood emails in all caps about community values. It was as if the confrontation with the police had slapped the wind out of her ego. I wish the story ended there. I really do. It would have been nice to sip coffee in my kitchen, enjoy the morning sunshine, and say, well, that was the end of Karen. But people like Karen don't stop. They retreat, regroup, then come back twice as desperate. The first sign was subtle. Around 6 p.m., one evening, I noticed tire tracks across my front lawn, deep ones. A car had driven onto the grass far enough to reach my side window. My cameras didn't catch the vehicle directly. Whoever did it had parked just out of frame. But one camera caught a shadow of a figure crouching near my house, holding something shiny. It looked like a phone or small tablet. They weren't breaking in. They were documenting something. The next morning, I woke up to 3 emails from Karen Long, rambling messages accusing me of structural negligence, unsafe property conditions, and violations of exterior presentation standards. Included were photos of a single leaf stuck in my gutter, my garden hose lying in a loose coil, a tiny, hardly noticeable crack on one of the driveway tiles. She had called these serious safety hazards requiring an immediate inspection. Inspection? By whom? I scrolled down. There it was. An HOA representative will be conducting a property review within the next 48 hours. Failure to grant access will be deemed non-cooperation. Access. Again. Karen didn't learn from the police visit, she doubled down. I responded with one sentence. No one is allowed on my property without my written permission. 5 minutes later, she replied. This is not optional. I didn't bother answering. Instead, I installed 2 more cameras facing the lawn and the sidewalk, one facing the back gate. The next incident happened 3 days later. I was working in my home office when I saw movement on my front camera. A white SUV, the same one with no plates I'd seen before, pulled up. A man stepped out. Not the same guy from last time. This one wore sunglasses and a pale blue polo shirt embroidered with MRE Compliance Division, which I immediately recognized as fake. The HOA had no compliance division. They didn't even have uniforms. He approached my porch and tried the doorknob. When it didn't turn, he knocked. Not a normal knock, firm, authoritative, impatient. I answered the door but kept the security chain in place. Can I help you? Yes, he said, flashing a laminated card so quickly I couldn't even read the name. "I'm here for the safety inspection." "No," I said immediately. "You're not." He frowned, pretending to be confused. "You were notified. It's mandatory." "Not by any legal authority," I replied. "Leave." He shifted slightly. "Failure to cooperate could result in further action by the board." I couldn't resist. The board? Or just Karen? His expression flickered confirmation enough. I lifted my phone, still recording. "This is trespassing. Leave now." He muttered something under his breath, then walked back to the SUV. Not hurriedly, not embarrassedly, angrily. He peeled away down the street, tires squealing. That night, I reviewed the footage frame by frame. The badge he flashed wasn't an ID, was a laminated HOA parking pass. A terrible fake. Karen wasn't even trying to disguise the fraud well anymore. She was slipping. And desperate people make mistakes. The next morning I received a certified letter, the kind that requires a signature. I opened it carefully, half expecting glitter bombs or poison ivy spores. Instead, I found something worse. A formal-looking document with bold letters across the top. Notice of Community Security Violation, Level 3 Designation. Level 3. What was that supposed to mean? I scanned the paragraphs, each more ridiculous than the last. Apparently, according to Karen's imagination, I was resisting community compliance. I was creating a hostile environment for HOA representatives. I was posing a threat to community cohesion. The HOA had legal grounds to secure the property for community safety. Legal grounds to secure my property. That's when the panic hit, not fear, but the realization of how far Karen might go. She had tried fines, tried shame, tried fake amendments, tried forged signatures, tried inspections, tried 911. What was next? I didn't have to wonder long. At 8:42 that same night, a series of loud thuds shook my front fence. I checked the camera in time to see two people hoods up, masks on, peering through the slats before running back to a car. They weren't burglars. They weren't teenagers. They were checking access points. Planning something. I printed the footage, emailed it to my attorney, and saved multiple copies. Whatever Karen was building toward, she was accelerating. 2 days later, I got the answer. A document slid under my front door while I was showering. When I picked it up, water still dripping from my hair, I felt my stomach twist. It was a HOA internal transition plan, a messy 3-page collection of pseudo-legal language outlining how the HOA would take possession of my home, how they planned to reassign the property to a qualified community member, how the HOA would change the locks for security purposes, how they would remove the current occupant without delay, and at the top, stamped in crooked red ink, were the words, "Prepared by President Karen Harrison." She didn't even try to hide it. She wanted my house so badly she'd written herself a decree. But the most insane part wasn't the document itself, it was the attachment. A printed MLS listing draft, with pictures of my home, my living room, my backyard, my kitchen. Someone had broken onto the property to take them. The listing price? $489,000. A bargain, apparently, because the HOA wasn't planning to sell it, they were planning to transfer it. My phone nearly slipped out of my hands as I stared at the papers. This wasn't bullying anymore. This wasn't intimidation. This was attempted theft. Large-scale, organized, calculated, criminal. I spent the rest of the day compiling an airtight digital dossier to present to the investigator every document, every video, every inconsistency, every date, every attempt she made to enter my property illegally. Every forged signature, every threat. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because I had too much work to do. By the next morning, I had a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. And Karen was out of time. Because 2 hours after sunrise, as I was making coffee, a notification buzzed on my phone. County Investigator Morales wanted to meet. He had reviewed the fraudulent lien, the fake amendments, and the forged documents. He had questions, a lot of them, but he didn't want to meet at the police station. He wanted to meet at my house. Something big had shifted, and Karen, she was about to face the consequences she thought she was immune to. She had built a paper castle of lies. and I was about to burn it down with the truth. Investigator Morales showed up at my house early the next morning, early enough that I was still on my first cup of coffee, standing barefoot in the kitchen. I spotted him through the camera feed before he knocked. Mid 50 seconds, tall, sharp gaze, wearing a charcoal jacket and holding a slim leather folder tucked under his arm. The kind of man who didn't waste time and didn't tolerate nonsense. When I opened the door, he gave me a respectful nod. "Mr. Coleman, that's me. I'm Investigator Morales with the county. I understand you filed a report regarding attempted lien fraud by your HOA. Attempted and failed, I said, mostly because they're terrible at forging signatures." He cracked a faint smile. "If it's as bad as the preliminary reviewer said, this should be straightforward." I stepped aside to let him in, and his eyes immediately scanned my organized table me binder, photos, security screenshots, emails, all laid out in forensic order. He seemed impressed. "You weren't kidding," he said. "This looks like an entire case file already." "I work in cybersecurity," I replied. "Documentation is a habit." He sat down and I began walking him through the evidence. Every time I flipped to a new page, his eyebrows rose a little higher. "Fake notarization," he said, tapping one page, clearly forged. He picked up another document. "This isn't even formatted correctly. It's missing the statutory foreclosure notice requirements. Completely invalid." Then he held up the alleged payment agreement. This would be comical if it weren't criminal. We went through each piece meticulously. Fraudulent amendment notices, fake HOA resolution, unauthorized inspections, mystery SUV, photos of people trespassing, the absurd transition plan for taking my home, the printed MLS listing. When he saw that one, he sat back and exhaled a long, tight breath. "They drafted a listing," he murmured. "She seriously prepared a listing for a house she doesn't own. And took photos from my side yard," I added. He rubbed his jaw. "This is no longer just fraud, it's attempted property theft. And harassment," I said. "And criminal impersonation," he added, pointing at the fake compliance officer. He turned the page again and paused. "And this attempted lien filing, I reviewed it personally." I watched his face closely. "What did you find?" I asked. He leaned forward. "The notary number belonged to a woman who passed away in 2018. I felt something cold settle in my chest." "So Karen used a dead woman's seal?" "No," he said. "Someone scanned a notary stamp from an old document and pasted it onto this one. But whoever did it didn't bother checking the date." I shook my head. "Unbelievable." He closed the binder slowly, hands resting on the cover. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Coleman, you do know this may result in criminal charges?" "I was hoping you'd say that." He nodded. "But first, I need to ask. Has she attempted physical entry or forced access?" "Not yet," I said, "but she's working her way there. She sent people to my property. Tried to enter. Tried to scare me. Tried to make me vacate voluntarily." He jotted notes. "And called 911 claiming she was the owner." "Yes, that," he said, "is false reporting, especially when paired with fraudulent documents presented to law enforcement." He closed his notebook. "I'll be interviewing her next." I didn't envy him. Before he left, he handed me his card. "If she approaches you again, or if you see anyone attempting to enter this property, call me. Directly. Don't wait." "Trust me," I said. "I've been waiting for someone on your side to understand what she's doing." He nodded and stepped out, and that's when the real fireworks began. Because the moment the investigator visited my home, Karen noticed. How do I know? Because exactly 20 minutes later, she sent a mass HOA email with the subject line, "UArgent community warning. Misinformation spread by a homeowner. Typical Karen when cornered, she doesn't retreat. She detonates." The email was long, rambly, unhinged. She accused me of spreading lies about the HOA, fabricating documents, the irony, threatening board members, weaponizing law enforcement, endangering the community by refusing legal HOA directives, being mentally unstable and unpredictable. She even wrote, "The HOA is forced to take emergency action to secure community safety. Please report any suspicious activity by the homeowner at 1128 Willow Bend immediately." She included my address. She actually listed my address to the entire community. Within the hour, my inbox filled with confused messages from a few neighbors who weren't brainwashed. Others just stayed suspiciously silent. One even knocked on my door later that evening, a nervous older man clutching the newsletter printout. "Is any of this real?" he asked. "No," I replied, "but what she's doing is—" Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. "You think you can get me in trouble? Just wait, Karen." Obviously. At 9:13 p.m., I saw movement on my side camera. Someone tugged on my gate. Hard. Then left after noticing the camera blinking. At 10:02, someone walked past my driveway, filming my garage with their phone. At 10:47, a silver sedan parked across the street for 10 minutes before leaving. Karen had unleashed a witch hunt. The next morning, things escalated again. A notice appeared on my door, not printed, handwritten. "You are ordered to vacate this property within 24 hours. No letterhead, no signature, just Karen's handwriting recognizable from every passive-aggressive note she'd ever taped to a trash bin. I took a picture and forwarded it to Morales. His response was immediate. "Thank you. This will be added to the case." But Karen wasn't done humiliating herself yet. Later that afternoon, she marched right up to my yard with 2 board members in tow, same pathetic duo as always. I stepped onto the porch, folded my arms, and waited. Karen planted herself in the center of my walkway like she was about to declare war. "We have reviewed Mr. Coleman's continuing violations," she announced loudly, clearly performing for her tiny audience, "and the HOA has reached a unanimous decision. You are no longer fit to reside in this community." I blinked. "Is that so?" "Yes," she snapped. "We have the authority." "No," I said calmly, "you very much don't." She held up a stack of papers again, probably the same forged junk. "These documents prove—" I cut her off. "Those documents will be turned over to Investigator Morales tomorrow." Her face changed. A twitch, a flicker of fear, then rage. "You called the county on me?" she screeched. "No," I said. "I reported fraud. The county called you." She opened her mouth to scream something else, but the board members suddenly looked nervous. They stepped back slowly, as if realizing they were standing next to a ticking bomb. Karen jabbed a finger toward my door. "You're going to regret this." "Funny," I said. "That's exactly what the investigator told me about you." Her face twisted, and for a moment, I genuinely thought she might try to shove past me into the house. Instead, she spun around, stormed back down the path, and barked at the board members to "comb on," like they were disobedient pets. When they reached the sidewalk, she turned back and yelled, "This isn't over." But the truth was written all over her face. It was over. She just didn't know it yet. Because less than an hour later, I got another call from Investigator Morales. "Mr. Coleman," he said, voice steady in that way that tells you something serious is happening. "I spoke with Miss Harrison." "Oh?" I asked lightly. "How'd that go?" There was a brief pause, a heavy one. "She was not cooperative, and she attempted to present forged documents to the county." I swallowed. "She did what?" "Yes," he said, "in front of multiple witnesses." I waited. "And as of this moment," he continued, "there is now an active criminal investigation open against her." I felt a slow, cold exhale leave my lungs. "She may attempt further retaliation," he added. "Be vigilant, and call me immediately if she comes near your property again." I hung up, stood in my quiet kitchen, and realized that Karen was no longer just spiraling. She was falling, hard. And the ground beneath her was coming fast. The next 48 hours were some of the longest of my life. Not because I was afraid, fear tends to fade once the law gets involved, but because I knew exactly what people like Karen did when cornered. They didn't reflect. They didn't apologize. They didn't back down. They detonated. And I could feel it brewing. The way animals sense storms before they appear. I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me check the cameras. Every passing car made my pulse tighten. Not from panic, but from anticipation. Karen was going to do something reckless, something spectacularly unhinged. I just didn't know what, yet. It was around 6 p.m., dusk settling in, when the first sign appeared. A black sedan at Karen's usual vehicle rolled slowly down my street. It wasn't a neighbor's car. This was newer, darker, tinted, the kind people rent when they want to avoid being recognized. It crept past my house, then circled the cul-de-sac and came back. This time, it stopped directly in front of my driveway. My cameras caught everything: the license plate, the tinted windows, the slight shift of someone moving inside, but no one got out. They stayed there for almost 5 minutes, just watching. Then they drove away. I knew exactly what that was. Reconnaissance. Karen had shifted from HOA drama to criminal strategy. I emailed Morales the footage. His reply came 2 minutes later. Thank you. Do not engage. Continue documenting. My house turned into a fortress that night, every door locked, alarms set, cameras refreshed every hour. I didn't leave a single blind spot. The next day, just after sunrise, the retaliation began. A bright orange sticker was slapped onto my front door. Not printed, not official. Just a giant, screaming square of neon paper that read, "Condemned property not safe for occupancy." I tore it off immediately. There was no stamp from the city, no signature, nothing but Karen's shaky handwriting at the bottom. She was impersonating a government order, a felony. I sent it to Morales with the caption, "She's escalating." His reply, "I'm coming by later, be home," as if I planned to go anywhere. Around noon I heard voices in my backyard, not kids, not neighbors, adults. Whispering, rustling, footsteps against gravel. I checked the cameras. 2 men hoodies up, gloves on were near my gate. One held a crowbar. The other held bolt cutters. They weren't large, but they moved with the confidence of people who'd done this before. My throat tightened not from fear, but fury. I hit the microphone button on my security app and blasted my voice through the outdoor speakers. "You're being recorded. Leave now." They froze like deer caught in headlights. Then they ran full sprint, crashing through bushes, jumping into a waiting truck that screeched away. I saved the footage, zoomed in on their faces, their clothing, the truck, the partial license plate. Then I emailed it to Morales. His response was immediate. "I'm on my way." While waiting for him, something even more absurd happened. At 1:46 p.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the live feed expecting Karen or her bored puppets. Instead, a stranger stood there, a woman in her 30s, holding a binder and wearing a business blazer. She looked polished, professional, and completely out of place in my drama-fueled front yard. I opened the door cautiously but didn't unlock the storm latch. "Can I help you?" "Hello," she said calmly. "I'm here to discuss purchasing your home." I blinked. "Your what?" She smiled like this was the most normal conversation in the world. "I'm a real estate consultant. I was informed the property is in transition and may soon become available. I'd like to know if you're willing to discuss a private offer." I stared at her. Hard. "Who told you that?" She flipped through her binder. "I was given this packet by your HOA president." She handed me the packet through the crack in the door. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. Inside were printed photos of my home, the same ones taken illegally. A fake listing sheet, a forged vacancy order, and a memo from Karen stating, "The current occupant is being removed for repeated violations. Home will be available for reassignment by the board." The consultant kept talking, unaware she was holding the smoking gun to a felony. "I was told the HOA is expediting the process, so I wanted to get ahead of—" I cut her off. "Ma'am, this is all illegal. Every word of it. I'm the owner. There is no transition. And your source is under criminal investigation." Her smile vanished. "Criminal?" "Oh yes." She gulped visibly. "Should I call my supervisor?" "I'd recommend calling a lawyer," I said. She backed away slowly, eyes wide, and practically sprinted to her car. The moment she drove off, I emailed the packet to Morales with the subject line, "She's involving the real estate market now." He called me instead of responding by email. "Do not answer the door for anyone else," he said. "Stay inside. I'm 10 minutes away." I paced the living room, each tick of the clock tightening the air around me. This was no longer HOA lunacy. This was organized property theft. A scheme. A plan Karen had crafted in layers, each more illegal than the last. And then, at exactly 2:19 p.m., Karen herself appeared. My cameras caught her marching down the sidewalk, rage radiating off her like heat. She wasn't wearing her usual blazer. This time she wore a dark coat and sunglasses, like a villain in an off-brand spy movie. She stormed straight to my front steps and pounded on the door so hard the frame rattled. "Open up!" I didn't. "Open this door right now." I didn't move. Through the doorbell camera, I could see her chest heaving. She was shaking with fury, hair wild, breath coming out in visible puffs. She wasn't even pretending anymore. "I know what you're doing," she screamed. "You think the county can stop me? You think they'll believe you? They won't. The HOA board stands with me." That was a lie. I'd seen the fear in the board members' faces. They were seconds away from abandoning her. She banged again. "I will take what's mine. Do you hear me? I will take this house back." Take it back? She never owned it. She was losing her grip on reality. I spoke through the security speaker. "Karen, leave the property. The investigator is on his way." She froze. Her head snapped up. "He's what? On his way?" She began shaking her head frantically like a child denied candy. "No. No, 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 this isn't how this goes. I am the president. I make the rules." Her voice cracked into a near scream. "You can't do this to me. You can't ruin everything. This is my community." And then right on Quaya, black SUV pulled up behind her. Not the sedan, not the plateless SUV, a county vehicle. Investigator Morales stepped out. Karen spun around, eyes widening with pure, unfiltered panic. "No, no, you can't be here. I didn't do anything." His voice was steady. "Miss Harrison, I need you to step away from the property." Her head whipped toward him, then back to the doorbell camera, then to him again. A trapped predator. "You don't understand," she hissed. "He's lying. He forged the documents. He's trying to steal the house. Miss Harrison," Morales repeated, "step away. Now." Karen didn't move. So he stepped forward. She stumbled back, hands shaking. "You can't take me in. You can't. I didn't do anything wrong." He didn't even answer. He just raised his hand toward his radio. Karen broke. She bolted down the sidewalk like she thought she could outrun law enforcement. But she didn't make it more than 6 feet before 2 more county officers approached from the opposite direction. She skidded to a stop, breath hitching, hair wild, frantic. "No," she whispered. "No, no, this isn't supposed to happen." But it was. It was happening exactly the way she'd earned it. When Morales put his hand gently on her arm, not harsh, not aggressive, just firm, she looked like the world was ending. A scream tore out of her throat. "He ruined my life." But she wasn't screaming at the officers. She was screaming at my house, screaming at me. As they walked her toward the SUV, her voice cracked again. "This isn't over. I'll come back for my house. You hear me? It's mine." But even she didn't believe that anymore. Because even delusions have limits. And Karen had finally slammed headfirst into hers. Karen's arrest didn't bring silence to the neighborhood. It brought shockwaves. Word spread faster than wildfire in a dry canyon. By the time the county SUV pulled away with Karen inside screaming, kicking, swearing vengeance, half the street had gathered behind cracked curtains and cracked open doors. You'd think people would react with relief. Some did. But others, well, some stood in clusters on the sidewalk, whispering in disbelief, their expressions torn between fear and confusion. Karen had ruled this community for years. She was the queen of petty power, the one they all obeyed or tolerated because fighting her felt impossible. Now she was gone, dragged off by investigators, exposed, humiliated. And the kingdom she'd built on intimidation? It started collapsing instantly. I watched from behind my front window as Morales and his team gathered evidence, snapping photos of the fake condemnation sticker, the footprints near my gate, and the notes Karen had left. When he finished, he walked back toward my door and I stepped outside to meet him. "She won't be returning anytime soon," he said, voice steady. "She's facing multiple charges: fraud, forgery, false reporting, trespassing, attempted unlawful seizure of property. This case..." He let out a breath. "This case is extensive." I crossed my arms. "What happens next?" "She'll be processed, questioned, and held until a judge reviews the case. She might make bail, but she won't be allowed to return here. A restraining order will be recommended. You'll get a call from the district attorney's office." I nodded slowly. "Good." He paused, studying my face. "You handled this well. Most people crumble under pressure like this." "I've dealt with cybercriminals," I said quietly. Karen was basically a less sophisticated version. That earned a faint smile. "Keep your security systems active for now. The investigation will continue, and we'll be analyzing the documents she used. If we need testimony, I'll let you know." He shook my hand and headed back to his SUV. It was over, at least legally. but the emotional aftershocks in the neighborhood were just beginning. Within an hour, board members were knocking nervously on my door first, the tall, anxious-looking man who always stood behind Karen like a terrified shadow. He stood there wringing his hands like he expected me to yell at him. Mr. Coleman?" he stammered. We didn't know what she was doing." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? You didn't know she forged documents? Filed fake liens? Tried to sell my house?" He flinched. "She said it was legitimate. She said lawyers approved it. She said..." "You believed her?" He swallowed hard. "She was very convincing. I almost felt bad for him. Almost." Before I could respond, the other board member shuffled up shorter, older, with a constantly worried face. He offered a weak smile. "We're calling an emergency meeting tonight. We're removing her from the board." "Officially," I blinked. "She's currently being processed by the county. I'm pretty sure she removed herself." He coughed awkwardly. "Yes, well, we need to rewrite the minutes and clarify some things." "Clarify?" I said. "Or cover up?" They exchanged a panicked glance. I didn't push further. Not now. But they knew. They knew the board had failed to supervise her, failed to question her, failed to do anything except nod, smile, and sign whatever she shoved in front of them. And now, they were scrambling for survival. They left with a promising, overly enthusiastic one about restoring trust in the community and learning from this incident. Whatever. I closed the door, leaned back against it, and let out a slow breath. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, and the exhaustion hit me like a falling tree branch. For the first time in months, my house felt like mine again, quiet, safe, grounded. But that peace didn't last long. Later that evening, another knock echoed through my home. I checked the camera first always, the camera, and saw a handful of neighbors on my porch, people I barely knew. People who had mostly avoided me for months thanks to Karen's propaganda. I opened the door cautiously. A woman in her 60 seconds stepped forward, wringing her hands. "We're so sorry," she said, voice trembling. "We had no idea what she was doing to you." Behind her, a younger couple nodded vigorously. "She told us you were dangerous," the husband said. "That you were hiding something. That she needed to protect the community." His wife chimed in. "We're embarrassed we believed her." I sighed, more tired than angry. She manipulated everyone. More neighbors arrived. Some apologized. Some looked horrified. Some literally cried because they had trusted Karen for years. A few even admitted they had voted for her repeatedly because she seemed so organized. Organized? Sure. Organized like a criminal enterprise. Then came the neighbor I least expected, Mrs. Patterson. The woman who had smiled at me for months, then suddenly snubbed me after the newsletter smears. She stepped closer, clutching her cardigan. "I'm ashamed," she whispered. "We should have asked you." Instead of assuming, I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Her watery eyes said everything. The final knock came later that night. A soft, hesitant tap. I checked the camera again. It was the tall, silver-haired man from the house 2 doors down. Retired Air Force, quiet, always polite. A man who rarely involved himself in HOA business. He stood alone on the porch, shoulders squared. When I opened the door, he didn't apologize. He didn't ramble. He didn't shift nervously like the others. He simply said, "Thank you." I frowned slightly. For what? For standing up to her. For not letting her run this place into the ground. For documenting everything. Most people wouldn't have fought back. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen leadership failures before. "People like her," he said. "They don't stop until someone stops them. You did." I nodded slowly, accepting the words. Someone had to. He offered a firm handshake. I returned it. Then he walked away without another word. When the last neighbor was gone and the street grew quiet, I stepped outside onto the porch and looked around the neighborhood, my neighborhood. For the first time it felt different. Lighter, freer. The fear that had infected the community under Karen's reign was dissipating. The tightness in people's shoulders was gone. The hushed gossip had died out. A strange, collective exhale passed through the street like the end of a long, exhausting storm. But the story wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning I received an official packet from the district attorney's office. Inside were the charges filed against Karen, a preliminary court date, a victim statement form, a request for digital evidence, a proposed restraining order, and a letter explaining the severity of the case. Karen wasn't just being investigated, she was being prosecuted. The charges included attempted real estate fraud, filing a fraudulent lien, document forgery, false reporting to law enforcement, conspiracy to commit unlawful eviction, trespassing, harassment, impersonation of government authority, and interference with a law enforcement investigation. It was a list long enough to wrap around my porch. Later that same afternoon, the HOA board held their emergency meeting. You would think they'd host it in the clubhouse like usual, but no, they held it over Zoom because none of them wanted to face the residents in person. I watched from my living room, popcorn in hand. The screen filled with 30 anxious homeowner faces. The vice president cleared his throat. "We, are removing Miss Harrison from the HOA board." Someone in the chat typed, "No kidding." Another typed, "You waited until she was arrested?" The board stumbled through excuses, claiming they didn't know the extent of her actions, trusted her leadership, and believed she was acting in the best interest of the community. Half the residents weren't buying it. The chat turned into a battlefield. Why didn't you question her? Why didn't you review the documents? Why did you sign off on fake amendments? You let her bully people. She threatened my husband too. Eventually, one resident unmuted herself and shouted, "You let this happen." It was pure chaos, a digital riot, and in the middle of it, I sat on my couch, sipping coffee, watching the very organization that tried to steal my home crumble into pieces. By the end of the meeting, 2 board members resigned. The remaining one called for a community vote to restructure the HOA entirely. Almost everyone agreed. The Karen era was over, and the HOA she manipulated for years was collapsing under its own weight. But there was still one more chapter ahead, a courtroom, a verdict, and a chance for Karen to finally face every consequence she'd tried to inflict on me. The weeks leading up to the hearing felt surreal. For the first time in months, my home was calm. No mysterious cars parked outside, no fake inspectors, no threats taped to my door, no one creeping around my fence with a camera or clipboard. The silence felt almost artificial at first, like a wound healing slower than the pain fades. But every time I stepped outside, someone would stop. My neighbors, dog walkers, people I had never spoken to before. Some apologized again, some thanked me. Some whispered the latest gossip about Karen, like they were sharing classified intel. My personal favorite was from Mr. Larson, the retired mechanic. She kept a binder labeled non-compliant residents. We found it in her garage. She had color-coded tabs. Color-coded? Of course she did. The HOA, in shambles after Karen's meltdown, scrambled desperately to fix their image. They hosted community dialogue sessions, passed out surveys, and sent out overly cheerful emails full of emojis like they were running a summer camp instead of an organization that nearly helped someone steal my home. But no matter how much the HOA tried to pretend everything was normal, the truth hung in the air like thick fog. Everyone was waiting for the court hearing. Everyone. And so was I. The morning of Karen's preliminary appearance, I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my Binderthy thick one Morales had complimented, and drove down to the county courthouse. The air in the parking lot buzzed with tension. A few neighbors were there too. Apparently the drama had become a community event. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Pale walls, polished wooden benches, a seal above the judge's bench that seemed to stare down at everyone with a "don't you dare waste my time" expression. Karen sat at the defendant's table. Seeing her again after everything was strange. Not satisfying, not triumphant, just strange. Her hair was a disheveled version of its former rigid style, and her blazer, no longer neon pink, was replaced with a dull gray that made her look smaller, almost deflated. She kept her eyes down, shuffling papers with shaky hands, whispering frantically to her attorney, a man who looked like he regretted his life choices deeply. Around us, people whispered, "That's her. She really tried to take his house? Unbelievable. She forged a dead notary's signature." I didn't engage in any of it. I simply waited. When the judge entered, every whisper died instantly. Karen's attorney did the usual routine claims of misunderstanding, procedural confusion, overzealous HOA policy enforcement, and my personal favorite, my client believed she was operating within her rightful authority. The judge cut him off with a sharp, irritated glance. She attempted to file a fraudulent lien on a home that was not hers. She impersonated legal authority. She forged signatures. She misled law enforcement. She initiated a false report that caused officers to respond under the belief that a crime was in progress. Do you expect this court to believe she did all that by mistake? The attorney shrank. Your Honor, we're simply suggesting. No, the judge snapped. You're excusing. I'm not interested in excuses today. Karen's shoulders trembled. Then it was my turn. I stepped up to the witness stand, placed a hand on the worn leather Bible, and swore to tell the truth. My voice was calm, steadier than I expected as I recounted the timeline. Every forged document, every fraudulent claim, every threat, every fake inspection, every time Karen trespassed or sent others to do it. When I showed the judge the transition plan where Karen literally drafted a document planning to seize my home, the judge's eyebrows shot up so fast I almost laughed. Then came the fake MLS listing. The courtroom murmured like a hive of shocked bees. Miss Harrison, the judge said slowly, you attempted to list a property for sale that did not belong to you? Karen started crying, not soft sniffles but loud, messy sobs. Her voice cracked as she shook her head over and over. He was refusing to follow rules. He was a danger to the community. I had to protect the neighborhood. I had to act. By stealing his house? The judge said sharply. Karen froze, mouth open. Her attorney tried again. Your Honor, what my client meant to say. Your client meant exactly what she said, the judge replied. Her intent is clear. Then the judge turned to me. Mr. Coleman, thank you for your diligence in documenting everything. Your record-keeping prevented a significant injustice. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. It felt strange to hear that out loud. The judge took a long pause, then spoke with a tone that echoed through the entire courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, the court finds that Miss Karen Harrison engaged in